Yeah, okay. Okay, so the topic of this town hall is the importance of AAPI representation in media and in politics. Um, so I want to start off by talking about I want to discuss a significant issue, which is like negative Asian American representation. So we will explore how harmful stereotypes have persisted in media portrayals and how underrepresentation has impacted Asian Americans in politics. And then we'll hear from two speakers, uh, Professor C.N. Lee, an Asian American Studies professor at UMass Amherst, who will talk to us about representation in the media, and Amherst Town Councilor Shalini Balmilne, who will tell us her own story about representing the South Asian community in Amherst through politics. Um, Okay, so as we delve deeper into the topic of Asian American representation in media, it's essential to acknowledge instances of negative portrayals and harmful stereotypes that have persisted. For years, Hollywood has perpetuated damaging stereotypes that misrepresent Asian Americans. One example is the yellow peril stereotype, which portrays Asians as threatening and untrustworthy, which was prevalent in early films where Asian characters often were cast as villains or sidekicks. Speaking more modernly, two shows that I grew up watching were Phineas and Ferb and Jessie, which each included an Indian side character. Baljeet, a character from the animated series Phineas and Ferb, is known for his academic prowess, but is portrayed as socially awkward and excessively nerdy. This portrayal aligns with stereotypes of the model minority, in which Indian Americans and other Asian Americans are typecast as being only interested in academics and lacking other social skills. Baljeet's character lacks dimension, reducing him to a one-dimensional stereotype rather than a fully developed character. In Jessie, the character Ravi, an adopted Indian American child, displays an exaggerated accent and is often the subject of jokes centered around his ethnicity. This perpetuates the foreigner stereotype and mocks the way he speaks. Such portrayals disregard the diverse experience of Indian Americans and suggest that their culture and accents are something to be ridiculed at or to be the subject of jokes. So I think negative stereotypes like these have significant real world consequences. These portrayals can contribute to the reinforcement of harmful biases, influencing how individuals perceive and interact with Indian Americans and Asian Americans in real life. Characters like Baljeet and Ravi limit the representation of Indian Americans to narrow and superficial traits, neglecting to showcase their full range of experiences, talents, and challenges. These stereotypes shape the way that people from other backgrounds understand Asian American culture, potentially leading to misunderstandings and further perpetuation of stereotypes. Authentic representation I think, is vital for challenging these negative stereotypes and fostering a sense of understanding. By creating multidimensional characters with a variety of interests, talents, and personalities, I think Hollywood can dispel the myth that Asian Americans fit into a single mold. Showcasing Asian American characters in a variety of storylines and genres can break free from stereotypes and reveal their diverse experiences. So now I want to just turn our attention to Asian American representation in politics. It's crucial to acknowledge the challenges and negative perceptions that have historically affected the community's involvement in the political arena. Asian Americans have faced a long history of underrepresentation in political offices. While there have been notable strides in recent years, the numbers still fall short of equitable representation. This underrepresentation contributes to the marginalization of Asian American voices and perspectives in policy discussions. One concerning negative representation in politics is the perpetuation of the foreigner stereotype. Asian Americans, even those born and raised in the United States, are sometimes seen as perpetual foreigners. This stereotype undermines their belonging and ability to contribute to the political landscape as engaged citizens. The model minority myth, often perpetuated in media, has an impact on Asian American political engagement. The stereotype can lead to assumptions that Asian Americans don't need assistance or that they do not face significant challenges. Consequently, the politics aimed at addressing their specific needs may be overlooked. Accurate and equitable representation in politics is crucial for several reasons. Proper representation ensures that the unique concerns and needs of the Asian American community are considered in policymaking processes. Having Asian American elected officials promotes inclusivity and diversity in political decision-making. Visible Asian American leaders inspire future generations to engage in politics, challenging the notion that political participation is limited to specific demographics. Diverse representation ensures that a variety of perspectives are considered, resulting in more comprehensive and effective policies. So now I would like to invite Professor Cian Lee to speak more about Asian American representation in media.
Thank you, Talvin. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. One sec here. Oops. Okay. All right. So I think all of us know by now, and to echo some of what Talvin has just said, that when it comes to the representation of Asian Americans in media, history has shown that they've either been completely non-existent, or we've also seen many examples in which these kinds of portrayals have been biased, stereotypical, often racially offensive, and do more harm than good. A lot of scholars point out that, when it comes to the representation of Asian Americans in media, we seem to swing on this pendulum between invisibility and hypervisibility. We're either completely invisible, or there are very hypervisible examples, many of which portray Asian Americans in, again, a very biased, stereotypical, and offensive manner. So, again, to kind of echo what Talvin has said, when it comes to the portrayal of Asian Americans based on gender, I think we start to see a lot of very interesting dynamics. And so a lot of them are based on, Orientalism, the cultural perception and stereotypes of Asians as exotic, mysterious, inferior, dangerous, and or hypersexual. And in the case of Asian and Asian American women, they've generally been portrayed as either the dragon lady type that is based on perceptions of them being very evil, conniving, and domineering, or as the so-called lotus blossom or geisha, which is much more hypersexual, also involving perceptions of them being quiet and submissive as well. When it comes to the portrayals of Asian and Asian American men, they've generally been seen either as sexually depraved and vampire-like, or as nerdy, asexual, effeminate, and passive and weak. And basically, while their particular characteristics may differ between Asian American men and women, what they generally share in common is the process of dehumanizing Asian Americans. And once you start down that path of dehumanization, it becomes much easier to treat Asians and Asian Americans differently, and to discriminate on them based on those perceived stereotypes. So, some people might think, there might be some positive examples of these kinds of media portrayals, right? Like Asian Americans being portrayed as the model minority, or as being good at math or computers, etc., or Asian American men being good at martial arts might be one example. And they might initially think, okay, these portrayals may not be completely flattering, but ultimately they're kind of harmless, right? In other words, what's the big deal? Well, the answer is that stereotypical perceptions, again, form the foundations of prejudice, and ultimately form the basis to engage in acts of discrimination. And that can have very real consequences for how Asians and Asian Americans are treated. And I want to show you this video that illustrates some recent examples of this kind of connection.
Good morning, Cecilia. The number of Asian hate crimes has really exploded over the last year, and it's made many people pause to ask, where did all this come from? The stigmas and the stereotypes associated with Asian Americans didn't just pop up over the last year. They are very much a part of American culture.
It's the puss, okay? And you still from wrong guy.
When people think of Asians, scenes from Hollywood favorites often come to mind.
What's happening, hot stuff?
Very often, the first thing that we see when we look at each other are the images that have been impressed on us by the media we consume.
So many scenes from films like Austin Powers.
I also think Austin Powers is very sexy.
And Mean Girls.
Coach Carr? Train pack?
Perpetuate negative stereotypes of Asian Americans.
Okie dokie, Dr. Joe's horse and potatoes.
And it's this scene from Full Metal Jacket that has permeated American culture like few others.
Me love you long time.
Those words used repeatedly in movies.
Me love you long time.
And TV shows.
Me love you long time.
Asian women often portrayed in Hollywood as sex workers. Either dominatrixes like this scene in Billions, or more submissive like the women in the massage parlors in Rush Hour 2.
Oh my goodness.
For Asian men, they're kung fu masters or nerds with no social skills.
Come on. Do math.
And frequently the punchline instead of the hero.
Now don't you kids take anything.
But it's when Hollywood chooses not to use Asian actors and actresses for Asian characters that the repercussions are the most damaging of all.
Maybe next time you can design me better.
In this scene from Breakfast at Tiffany's, Mickey Rooney plays an Asian man.
Let them all better.
He speaks with an accent, his eyelids taped, wearing buck teeth. But even more recent examples, like Matt Damon in The Great Wall, show white actors playing Asian heroes.
That, I think, is at the crux of this. For Asians, we're seeking more than just representation. We're seeking agency. We want to be able to tell our stories and show our characters in all of our splendor and complexity, because that's what it takes for people to actually see us as people.
In recent years, we've seen a breakthrough of new Asian movies, a shift, a new era. Movies like Crazy Rich Asians, Minari, and Parasite, which became the first foreign language film to win Best Picture at the Oscars.
We're seeing more and more Asian Americans in those roles, and we're seeing more and more Asian Americans who are active viewers. I think Asian Americans are kind of taking charge of our own destiny. That's what really makes me feel optimistic.
The Motion Picture Association telling us that it condemns all forms of racism and says it's committed to diversifying the pipeline as well as roles both in front of and behind the camera. You know, in my conversations with Asian Americans over the last several days and weeks, it's those stereotypes that are so damaging, reducing people to an idea that may or may not be true instead of actually seeing them for who they are.
Okay, so again, there's data to show how Asian Americans have been continue to be underrepresented in mainstream media. So I'm just going to really briefly summarize some of the data that exists out there. There was a comprehensive survey of the 1,300 most popular movies from 2007 to 2019. And in this case, they included both Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and together they make up about 8% of the total US population. But as you see in the numbers there, of these 1,300 most popular movies from that 13-year span, only about 5.9% of speaking or named roles were played by an Asian or Asian American or Pacific Islander actor. Only 3.3% of lead or co-leads were played by an AAPI actor. Of those, 14 were played by one actor, Dwayne Johnson. And again, only 3.5% were directed by an AAPI person. etc. And Asian American Pacific Islander men were the least likely group to be portrayed in any kind of sexualized way. That is also the case when it comes to portrayals in shows. A different report from UCLA looked at movies on cable TV, streaming, digital shows as well. And once again, the data shows pretty convincingly, pretty clearly that Asian Americans continue to be underrepresented across all these different forms of shows. So again, the underrepresentation or the lack of Asian American stories and characters leads to the issue that scholars have called narrative scarcity. So narrative scarcity is basically a situation where you only have a few portrayals that include AAPI people, history, and experiences as well. And in that kind of situation where there are only a few portrayals, each one of those portrayals tends to be widely generalized to the entire group. In other words, it becomes much more common for those very few portrayals and examples to be widely applied to the entire Asian American and Pacific Islander population. The opposite of narrative scarcity is narrative plenitude. That's when you have a wide variety of roles, of portrayals, of experiences and stories, so that one particular portrayal or story does not have to represent the entire group or the entire community. So for example, if you look at, say, the white American population, certainly we would never try to find one particular movie or TV show to try to represent the entirety of the white American experience or history or whatever. But that is the situation when it comes to narrative scarcity for Asian Americans. So we're starting to move more closely toward a situation of plenitude. Some of the examples were shown in that video clip that I just showed. But we still see, unfortunately, some examples in which Asian Americans are still misrepresented. Sometimes this involves portrayals that include yellowface, when non-Asian actors, almost always white actors, play Asian characters using some combination of makeup or facial prosthetics. Or we see examples of whitewashing, when Asian or Asian American characters are changed, when the original story in which that was built on, when it gets translated or adapted into a movie, the characters are changed from Asian or Asian Americans and then are played by non-Asian actors. Or another example involves Asian erasure. That's when shows or movies that are set in Asian cultures or countries have their Asian cultural references changed or completely removed. The implication of all these forms of misrepresentation is that Asian American actors or Asian Americans in general are devalued, are again dehumanized, are seen as inferior to white actors, and or that Asian and Asian American culture and history is insignificant and unworthy of being included. So in recent years, in the last 10 years or so, we've seen some ongoing examples of this kind of whitewashing and erasure. And some of the most famous or most infamous examples, again, were highlighted in that clip that you saw. Ghost in the Shell, the Great Wall, also Aloha were examples of this. And what we've also seen is that in each of these instances, Asian Americans mobilized and engaged in activism and leveraged the power of social media and other forms of internet communication technology to organize international boycott campaigns and other examples of criticism. And it led to, I think, very tangible results. Each of these movies had very disappointing opening weekends and ultimately very disappointing gross box office receipts. And they've also prompted major Hollywood studios to pledge to be more inclusive in their casting and in their storytelling and creation processes from this point forward. So I want to conclude by pointing out again that Asian American media representation does matter. It can, studies have shown that it can improve the individual self-esteem of Asian Americans. And I think this is really true for young Asian Americans, and particularly young Asian Americans who grow up in an environment where there are very few other Asian Americans around. And in this situation, again, they often find themselves being hyper visible. And examples that include Asian Americans can be hyper visible either in a good way or more times than not in a negative way. But these examples, these representations can also help to increase group solidarity as well. The examples that I just mentioned in terms of activism among Asian Americans in protesting against these examples of whitewashing and erasure, et cetera, are one example. And again, they can be a very powerful force in the process of Asian Americans fighting for cultural representation. This is the idea, cultural citizenship is the idea that Asian Americans, of course, we should have legal rights associated with being citizens, being residents of the US, but cultural citizenship goes beyond that. And it's a feeling that our histories, our experiences should be fundamentally included within the fundamental fabric of US society and US institutions. A big part of that is media representation, and that's why it matters. And that's why I think Asian Americans are paying much more attention to media representation, and in examples in which those representations are negative, are much more likely to take action to assert their rights for fair representation and assert their rights for cultural citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really incredible. Now we'll hear from Shalini Balmil about her own personal experiences in local politics.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And that was so fascinating. So many things to talk about there. So I was just thinking, like, what would I like to share? And firstly, of course, I would love to hear if you all have any questions, and hopefully there'll be time for that. What are the sort of questions you hear that might be helpful to hear from a South Asian woman who's in politics in the town of Amherst? But I was thinking of organizing what I can share in answering 3 questions. How did an Indian immigrant woman not interested in politics at all end up running for town council in Amherst? And then, but more importantly, why is that important? Why is it important for Asians and especially women to step into these leadership roles in our communities? And then I also want to touch upon what are the different ways that we can participate. So I'll start with the why. And going back to my own story, I moved to Amherst from India in 2001 with my son, who was 7 years old at that time, to start a new life. I had just gotten divorced in India and from an arranged marriage, and thought, started my PhD in the business school here and wanted to start afresh. And, we loved Amherst. It's just the trees. I still work outside as much as I can. I fell in love with the trees and nature and the community here. And unconsciously at the time, my son and we started letting go of some of our culture. We were so wanting to assimilate within the American culture that I would never think of wearing Indian clothes, for example, for a professional gathering. I just thought that would not be seen as professional. I wouldn't be taken seriously if I wore Indian clothes or my jewelry. My son came to me. I used to make these home tiffin lunches for him with chutneys and idli and like all this home cooked food, which was delicious, and he loved it. And then one day he comes back and he tells me that, "Mom, can you just give me peanut butter jelly sandwich?" And at the time, I wasn't that aware. And I didn't use that opportunity to talk with him and say, what's going on for you? I mean, I was like, okay, that's easier for me. You sure you don't want that? He's like, yeah, sure. And that was it. But that was an opportunity for me to talk to him, what's going on for him. And many years later, recently, we talked about it, that it was obviously the aroma of the Indian spices and food, and he was conscious and embarrassed about taking that to school. And that could have been a situation where I went to his school, spoke to the teacher and said, hey, can I bring in Indian food for the kids to try out, for example, right? And then we can talk about the spices, and we can talk about something, and make and sort of normalize that and celebrate that. But I wasn't that aware. And so that's one of the reasons I started creating the South Asian Festival in India. And that's how Talvin and I first met, because he reached out and he covered that story, which again, no media was covering. And actually, it was Talvin who covered the story, and it was the 75th year of independence of India and Pakistan. And we did like a joint celebration. And it was, for me, it was so heartwarming. And I almost like had tears, like thinking, when I spoke with Talvin, I was like almost crying. Not almost, I was crying, because I was so moved with this idea that there were these young children doing, Kathakali, the dance from India. We had UMass students coming and singing and the national anthem, but also we had kids from Pakistan talking about their history and culture. And there were all these residents, mixed, different people from different communities, listening to that, watching that, admiring that, and clapping. And I felt that's such a good message for young people to see that their culture, their music, their dance is being appreciated. Because in our family, when we grew up slowly, we stopped watching Indian movies, or we stopped listening to Indian songs. My son now listens and writes hip hop music, which is amazing. And he's a great human being. But also we talk a lot about that now that he's 28 years old, and like, he still remembers Hindi, but we didn't emphasize these things enough. So which is why I feel like as a town leader now, I'm making an effort to organize these sort of events, kind of what do you go by CN? Is that okay? So what CN was saying about the self-esteem of Asians, because one of the things that happened with us growing up and flourishing and doing really well in my job, and my son doing really well, but a part of us was always trying to be sort of similar, the same as the people here, which means we were hiding a part of who we are, like my Indianness. And so there's always a part of me that felt I wasn't as good as. And so I think the self-esteem, and for really allowing us and our children to grow up to be these human beings who really love who they are and their ancestry and their culture and their heritage, I think it's really important for them to see the leaders in their communities to be like them and to be from different cultures, to have these festivals that honor, that celebrate. So I think that's one big piece. And for me personally, I think the other thing I want to touch upon is the idea of belonging. Being an immigrant from India, I felt like I didn't really belong here. But I also didn't really belong back home because I have changed so much. And so it kind of felt like didn't really have that sense of belonging. And being in town council has really allowed me to get to know, to contribute to our community, to get to know people. And that has created such a sense of belonging for me. So I really encourage other people also from different communities, immigrants, to find ways where you can share some of your gifts, your interests. Doesn't have to be in town council. There's school committees, in your school's parent organizations. There's so many town committees. I didn't know that before I joined politics, but practically the whole town runs on volunteers. And so we have, committees for planning board. If you're an architect or interested in planning, we have arts and history and so many different boards, the tree committee and arts. I don't know, I'm repeating myself. But anyway, if you go to your town's website and you can see all the different committees that are out there, and they would love to have your individual perspective, like just as I was able to bring in, the South Asian kind of perspective, that would be amazing. So that's another thing, the sense of belonging, self-esteem, representation. And I think that's one of the things that I have moved is with another counselor, is to allow for non-citizen voting, because if you're here as a legal resident, I think communities are really losing out on the opportunities for people to then contribute by being able to step into these leadership roles and to vote. So that is something we've moved, and it's now in the state legislature where State Rep Mindy Dom has pushed that as a bill that still has to be acted on. So hopefully we will be able to at some point pass that. Let's see. I think that's all I have for now, but I really feel it has been one of the most and meaningful things I've ever done. It is not, as I started off saying, I was never interested in politics. And I don't know if I want to get into it, but if there are any questions, of course, I can share how I ended up getting into politics, and I can talk about that more, but it has been one of the most meaningful things I've ever done. And I really encourage everyone. I'm happy to reach out. You can reach out to me or check out the town websites. What are the committees out there? And if I could do it, and I'm happy to say I ran with very small budget and didn't know many people, and I won with the most number of votes in my district. So if I can do it, anyone can do it, and I'm happy to talk more about that. That's all for now.
Yeah, thank you so much. If anybody has any questions, now's the time to ask the questions. So yeah, does anybody have any questions?
I don't have a question for now, but I'm just wondering if anyone watching the recording wanted to email you or reach out. Is there an email or like a best form of contact?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Should we like say it aloud?
Yeah, sure. Talvin, are you giving it?
You can go.
Okay, so I think the easier one is, well, of course, you can look up my name, Shalini, which is very hard for many people, but it's Shalini Behel-Milne. But if you look up Shalini and Amherst Town Government, you'll find my email. But otherwise, my work email is shalini@knowyourmind.training. So that seems a little easier for people to remember. It's shalini@knowyourmind.training. Shalini is SHALINI. I think Charu has a hand up.
Yeah, this question is for Shalini, and I'm wondering how you think your role in politics has impacted the perception of South Asian Americans in the town, or maybe even a broader geographic area.
Well, I'd like to think that people seeing me can also see, and the people that I've spoken to in my network, that, hey, that there are all these different ways that you can participate. So it's given them an idea that they can also participate, because for many, at least I'll just speak on my behalf, like I did not grow up realizing that I can have a voice in the policy making in local politics. And local politics is so important because the decisions we're making locally affect our children's schools, what they're going to learn or where the money is going in terms of, what opportunities will be there for our local businesses, our communities, and so many different ways that the policies we're making. And so I'm hoping that when other Asians see me or, the Zoom meetings now, that they can also see like, oh, wow, even I can participate. And I've always been very open door that anyone, anytime can reach out to me. That was one of the basis of my campaign, was to make it a very collaborative sort of. So I was really working with everyone to educate residents, and I think I'm just blabbering at this point without really answering your question, which I don't know, but I hope so, that people feel motivated. But I also realized that before I joined, I was really busy with my family and this and that. I never thought it was important. Like, things are running, there are roads, there's electricity, and everything's running fine. So I never really thought about, why do I need to go to a district meeting, for example? So we all hold district meetings for our own constituents. Or why should I go and vote on the library? Or, like all these different votes that are coming out. Yeah, we vote at the national level, everyone pays attention, but locally, sometimes we don't pay as much attention. And that's one thing I really want to encourage people who will watch this. And thank you for asking that question, Charo, because I think I'm in all kinds of tangent, to let everyone know that it's really important for everyone to participate at the different levels, even at the level of district meetings.
And I had a corollary for CN on that. So CN, I'd love to get your scholarly perspective on Asian Americans in politics and how it's changed, sort of, on a larger spectrum. What you've seen the impact or the change be, positive or negative, or both.
Yeah, I think on the positive side, I think we're starting to see more Asian Americans becoming more interested in political representation, and at the local level, as Shalini illustrates, at the state level and at the federal level as well. And, I think that's a very positive sign. And I think it goes a long way toward trying to dispel these ongoing stereotypes that Asian Americans are only concerned about economic success, and they're not interested in integrating with the rest of their community or the rest of society. So I think that's a very positive sign. On the other hand, though, within this process, we are also seeing a lot of examples in which Asian Americans who are trying to run for office keep running into the same kinds of stereotypes, that they're seen as perpetual foreigners. Their loyalties as Americans, as US citizens, is questioned. Their suspicions that they're really agents for some Asian government, particularly if they happen to be of Chinese ancestry. And it just keeps going on and on. Some 150 years after Asians first came to the US in large numbers, we're still dealing with the same kinds of examples of Orientalism, the same kinds of examples of yellow peril, etc. There's no easy answer, but that's the fight ahead of us that we keep having to fight. And I think the examples that I brought up in my talk about Asian Americans mobilizing around media representation, they can easily be applied to organizing and mobilizing for more political power as well. And we're starting to see some examples of that. So that's my hope, that this overall trend of Asian Americans asserting their rights for cultural citizenship will also be applied in the political realm as well, so that we can start getting seats at the table, making our voices heard, not just for our own community, but for other underrepresented communities as well, and for, I think, the benefit of the entire US society.
Thank you for that question, Charu. I'll just add another perspective that I was just reading about recently in terms of leadership roles, and it wasn't necessarily political, but I think it definitely applies to leadership, political leadership, as well as this characteristic of Asians being less assertive. And one of the reasons that we don't, Asians are seen as very good workers, but not as good leaders because of that lack of assertiveness. And I think I've personally experienced that in some sense because of the generation I grew up in India, and being whatever, I found that I would do a lot of research and work, but I'm always feeling like I haven't done enough study. So I'm a little quieter and less assertive. And then I see other people, who maybe grew up here or what, but they're like so much more confident in the way they speak. So I'm like, oh, okay, they know what they're saying and I don't. So I'm just going to keep quiet. But that's another thing I really want to encourage people, is that if you feel something, even if it's not research, but it's your experience, it's really important to give voice to that. And over time now, when I feel like, oh, I don't think I have much to say, but something is like coming up in my body and I can like, no, I need to say something. Now I just go ahead and say it, because very often that perspective was needed in the room, which I realized later. So don't let that stop you from speaking up.
Can I ask a question? I have a question for CN, or anyone can answer it. So this was a great kind of, survey of what's going on in the media, and then you ended with things are kind of changing a bit now. And I guess my question is, how will we know when we've actually turned the corner on some of these old representations that are now, where we can then say, what can we say? The representation of Asian Americans is fundamentally different than it used to be. How would you know? How would we know? For instance, would it be like we do a survey representations and these Orientalist ones are like 25% or less? Is it like, well, representation numbers are a certain percentage? Is it the public would say that when they're asked about Asian Americans and attitudes or stereotypes, they would say, yeah, I see in a lot of things in the media. Like, yeah, I guess that's a question.
Yeah, that's a very good sociological question there, Pavan. I don't really have an answer to that. I think, of course, ultimately, the goal would be to have 0 examples of stereotypical representations, offensive caricatures, etc. But, in the same way that we also strive to completely end racism or sexism or any other examples of systemic injustice and inequality, I don't think we'll be able to get at absolute 0 anytime in the near future, unfortunately. I think that's just the reality. But that said, I think we are making progress in terms of more representations. Like I said, I think we're moving more toward the situation of narrative plenitude. And that's in regard to both external representations, external portrayals, but also more examples of portrayals, representations that are created by Asians and Asian Americans ourselves. Products coming from either Asia or from Asian American writers, directors, producers, etc. We're making progress. Progress is slow, but I would certainly say, compared to when you and I were growing up, there's been progress, but there's still plenty of work to be done, and there's still plenty that we need to keep fighting for. So, I think the challenge before us is to keep moving forward. And in the same way, like I said, that we are still fighting to end racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. I think there's always going to be a situation of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's always, I think, going to be the reality of our society and our social institutions. But I think those two steps forward are meaningful. And if we can keep adding to those steps little by little, hopefully we'll get to a situation where we're as close to zero as possible.
I have a question. So, CN, in your talk, you talked a lot about the role of activism in helping to change some of these perceptions. My question actually is to Shalini. I have two children in the public school systems in Amherst, and I have a lot of friends with children, you know, in middle school, high school age. How can Asian American youth support, you know, they're busy, they have a lot of homework, they have sports, they have other priorities, they have friends. What's a realistic way they can support representatives like yourself, but also just Asian American causes in their community? And what do those look like?
I would love to hear what Talvin has to say about that, because he has been doing this work, and that's how I got to know about the AAPI Commission. I didn't even know about that, really. So Talvin, did you want to say something first, or do you want me to go first, and then it'll give you some time too?
Yeah, sure. I can answer that. I think in terms of, yeah, like staying engaged with these issues, I think if you're passionate about them, you'll make a point to do it. When you're in high school, you have to find extracurricular activities anyways. So if you are passionate about these things, you'll find extracurricular activities that you are passionate about. And for me, like, I was passionate about a lot of these issues, so I made a point to be involved in them, like as like activities I was doing outside of school. Like, I had time for schoolwork and then separate time for extracurricular activities, and I made a point to have these issues at the forefront of those extracurricular activities. So I think if it's less of a passion, like if it's more just something you want to check in on once in a while, I think that's also, there's many ways to do that as well. But it's in terms of just getting involved, I think for me it wasn't too hard because my dad is also very involved in it. So he's already in that space. And for me, I think I got involved in it originally when I did an internship last summer with Stop AAPI Hate. And then now I'm also very involved in it with Youth Council as well. So just like, there are a lot of opportunities you can find online. I don't know. But yeah, I think if you're passionate about it, you'll make time for it. I think that's my answer to the question.
And there is some school, and there is school committees and stuff.
Yeah.
There's name a few.
Yeah, there's the People of Color United Club at Amherst High School, which and everybody should join. It's a great club. And then there's also the Asian American Club, which CK was part of that as well. So that club is still there. So yeah, I would encourage your child to join both of those. And there's a lot of affinity clubs, but the Asian American Club specifically worked a lot with the AAPI Commission last year, because CK and I were both involved with the Youth Council. And this year, CK has graduated, but will still be involved because I'm still in the council. So yeah, that's definitely a great way to be involved.
Thanks, Talvin. And I think I can speak more from the parents' point of view. I think we create the environment, as Talvin, you were saying, your father has, influenced you. So I think as parents, when we set the tone of being engaged in the community in some way or the other, there's so many opportunities, right? Like, as I was mentioning, the school, just your school, the parents' committee in schools is one, but then there's a school committee that you could join, or in the town office, there's a human rights commission is one, which is now I'm working with them to make the South Asian Festival an annual feature. So, and even if you're not joining it, you could even just be a volunteer with them. Just let them know, hey, because we, running when I in town council, like I also have my full-time job and family responsibilities, and I'm volunteering my time in council, and I have all these great ideas. But then to get the word out, to do the actual work, it takes so much time. So just connecting with the counselors that might be in your district, or like you want to connect with me, you can reach out to me. Hey, I'd love to volunteer and support in any way. And then I can let you know, okay, we're organizing the South Asian Festival. What ideas do you have? So I think reaching out to your district counselors, reaching out to counselors, and just letting them know that, we really appreciate that. Even letting people know that you're so appreciated, because mostly we get emails and people are unhappy and they hate us. So it's just nice even saying, hey, thank you for whatever, and just letting people know. I think you'll find ways, whether you're interested in arts or you're interested in planning, like what are your interests, and you can find a way to then contribute in a way that's that based on your time available. You can do that. And I'm happy to, of course, share more resources or anything. You have my email address. You can definitely reach out to me, and I'd love to work with you. Yeah, and then also bringing in stories. Like I brought, whenever I went to India, we tried to go to India as much as we could, and then depending on people's situation, whether they can travel or not, but I tried to get Amar Chitra Katha. That was like the storybook, the picture books about Indian stories. And so bringing those and reading those to my son when he was young, and we try to speak in Hindi a lot. And so it's, keeping that language, foods, and all of those things, and finding ways for the kids to really appreciate and experience it in a way, not forcing, because then they get resistant to it, but in a way making it more joyful and having fun with that.
All right, yeah, thank you both for speaking on the issues, and thank you for the great questions. Yeah, I think that's all, but thank you guys for coming.
Yay, thank you, Talvin, for organizing, and now you'll know where to find me so we can do this again. I'd love to do it, and definitely if I have more time, I completely forgot, we can definitely reach out to more people and let people know that this is happening. And now once the recording is there, we can definitely share that with people. So thank you all so much for the work you all do. And yeah, and thanks, Charu and family, for being here.
Great seeing everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Close the recording.